On to the international news scene. European Council President Charles Michel has expressed his concern over yesterday's blast outside Kabul airport. Michel warned that instability in Afghanistan shouldn't benefit terrorism. For more reaction from European Union member countries to the blast, we're crossing live now to our correspondent in Brussels, Lucy Hough. So, Lucy, the reaction from the European Union after the attack, how has it been, and is there any resolution of action to follow?
Well, I mean, certainly this attack was long feared. It was also anticipated. Of course, we had that alert from US and UK intelligence issued on Wednesday that led to a number of European countries rapidly drawing their evacuation efforts to a close. But after the attack on Thursday, there was shock and horror from European Union leaders. German Chancellor Angela Merkel described it as heinous. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, said the situation on the ground in Afghanistan was clearly deteriorating. That was a message also echoed by NATO's Secretary General. But there has been a pledge, despite the deteriorating security situation on the ground, to evacuate as many people as possible ahead of the August the 31st deadline and beyond, even though it will take some creative thinking in order to work out how to remove people from the country, given the situation on the ground at Kabul airport. So shock and horror, and certainly the focus in the short term is getting as many people out, despite the closure of those air bridges by a number of EU countries.
So we were speaking to our colleague Laura in the UK earlier on, just in terms of the casualties the UK has incurred. What about other European countries? Have they reported casualties on their side?
Well, clearly the news of British casualties has again been met with a very soulful response from European leaders. There is no information yet about whether European nationals have been caught up in the death toll of the attacks, but certainly we are expecting more information to come from that in the coming days. We know, of course, that there were a number of US troops, more than a dozen, killed as part of the attack. But certainly that is the situation that is being monitored closely by EU leaders.
So that blast in Kabul has created some anxiety on what action to take, especially with regards to the deadline of pulling out finally from Afghanistan. We know that the UK Prime Minister intends to have a conversation with the US President Joe Biden. Do you foresee this Afghanistan overshadowing the upcoming G20 meeting?
Well, there is a sense here in Europe of betrayal, I think it's safe to say, in some quarters at the action taken by the US administration. We know that EU leaders from Germany and France and from the United Kingdom had attempted to persuade Joe Biden during that G7 meeting earlier on this week to extend the deadline. I mean, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said it was mathematically impossible to meet the targets the United States had set out in terms of evacuations by that deadline. But Joe Biden stood firm. He couldn't be persuaded, and as a result, EU forces were really left with no other choice but to withdraw by the same deadline, despite the fact that we know that the UK had wanted to stay in the country for longer to continue that work. So it is likely to cause some tension in advance of those G20 talks. I mean, certainly publicly, the message from EU leaders is that the Western alliance stands strong, that NATO is standing together, but there is a sense that EU allies have not been consulted sufficiently by the US administration, and that really the operation on the ground perhaps could have been kept more stable if indeed there had been better communication from the White House.
Thanks, Lucy Hough, correspondent in Brussels. Let's continue with this. US officials now warning that the risk of additional attacks targeting American forces in Afghanistan remain high after a suicide explosion claimed dozens of lives outside of Afghanistan's Kabul airport yesterday. The Pentagon also clarified today that there was only one bombing, correcting initial information that put out on yesterday's attack. Some reports put the toll at over 100, including the deaths of 13 military personnel, the deadliest day for U.S. forces since 2011 and their first casualties in 18 months. An emotional U.S. President Joe Biden spoke at the White House late Thursday, vowing to hunt down the perpetrators while confirming that evacuation operations would continue until a Taliban